This week's readings offer a variety of different ways of approaching the concept of reconciliation. And the Radical Reconciliation book offers one view, specifically through the lens of the story of Rizpah in the book of 2 Samuel. And the Stevens chapter offers a examination of reconciliation through the lens of what he terms the place of reconciliation model. But generally, they all are dealing with this concept of reconciliation, which comes mainly from the Latin, the idea of reconciliare. So literally to bring back into community again. The conciliare is linked to the root word of, like, for example, council, or conciliation, or even community. That sort of root of co, where things are together and in some form of relationship. So at some level, reconciliation is bringing back into relationship what may not have been in relationship before, what was broken for some reason or another. Now, the challenge, of course, lies in the fact that reconciliation might bring together communities that were not in any way actually in a true form of community beforehand. So, for example, in South Africa, this is communities that had always been in some dynamic sort of situation of flux between, if you were the Afrikaners, being colonizer, but also then colonized by the British. And then, of course, with the people who had been living there already, the people of South Africa, the Zulu tribes, the Bantu tribes, the Bantu-speaking tribes. You have people who were in relationships with each other, but did not have any formal relationship with either the Afrikaner colonists or the English colonists. So to say reconciliation is the process that one wants to engage in as a bringing together again of a relationship might require a reframing of what reconciliation actually means. And this is where we have specifically the Christian witness of reconciliation, which kind of provides a very different take on the idea of community and the idea of relationship as what might be seen in more of a secular setting or in other religious traditions. So as the Radical Reconciliation book sort of starts off talking about, that Greek words for reconciliation mainly always had political implications. They were treaties, they were these agreements that occurred between warring peoples to cease the war and create a situation of peace. Which one could say that definition of peace is inherently based upon war, because peace is just simply the time when there isn't open warfare, as opposed to a time when peacefulness or peaceableness is itself actively focused on and actively developed, and war is an intrusion into an inherent situation of peaceableness. But the Christian setting sort of starts off specifically with the Apostle Paul in his letters, particularly in 2 Corinthians, where he kind of lays out this sort of a reconciliation as an idea of bringing back into relationship what God has already created as relational. So he lays out this sense that the relationships which are being brought back into togetherness are based upon all members of the creation having already inherently been in relationship, as they are members of the or elements of the creation of the divine. So the divine being is the foundational place upon which all relationship happens, and reconciliation is a healing of breaches in what the divine has already created as one community, as one set of relationships. So reconciliation both depends upon the divine being in relationship with the human, as well as humans having relationship with each other through being in relationship with the divine. So the Christian vision of reconciliation does inherently depend on the existence of a divine being, upon which this sort of community and relationship, will actually rest. So Paul is sort of laying out a different vision of reconciliation that is not inherently political first, but as politics, as we've seen in the class, politics is simply the ways, the processes, the sausage making of how communities wrestle with being in relationship and how they strive to continue to be in relationship with other communities. So inherently, anything that deals with a relationship with the other will already be political. But Paul is saying it's not first political, it's first spiritual, and then through the spiritual, the political emerges. So reconciliation, in many ways, is an empathetic move. It's an exchange of places with the other. It's a movement towards solidarity, restoring relationships, creating relationships possibly, and building a new framework of togetherness with the other person. With the other, even as like a category, other being anything which is not of my own identity, of my own ethnicity, anything which is seen as there is us and there is them. So when you have that kind of a conceptual break between us and them, the them is the concept of the other, and the other being anything which is not you. So reconciliation is striving to bring back into relationship the other, so breaking down the concept of other and bringing the other into the idea of us. So the Radical Reconciliation book really stresses the idea of reconciliation in Paul's mind occurring in this colonial context where there's an inherent power dynamic and power a break, where you have subjugation, you have a pollution of religious frameworks into service to the economic and political needs of the empire, and then crucifixion, specifically Jesus' crucifixion, as a way of sort of demonstrating that these power dynamics are in play and that real community doesn't actually really exist. So crucifixion was public subjugation, terror. It's a way to shock the colonized into a state of confusion and fear. And then once they're in this state, the empire forces the colonized subjects into taking on this double identity of being colonized, but also of needing to assimilate into the empire, so that, their us versus them idea is, the otherness of them not being in the empire is forced. They are forced into being an element of us being the empire by removing anything which is not congenial to the colonial identity, meaning anything that makes them uniquely themselves. And Paul then says, actually, reconciliation is about claiming who you are in your entirety, and then through that claiming of one's own identity and being and purpose, and finding that the meaning of personhood and identity in their createdness as a part of the creation, that actually means that they can be, by burying into that relationship with the divine, you are not only reconciling yourself to yourself, you're reconciling yourself to your identities, to your ethnic identities, to your connections with others. And it also allows for an alternative identity to the colonial identity. One that is, through Jesus, I am a human, and through Jesus, I am in a equal relationship with the empire. So Jesus, in Paul's view, strips away these layers of domination and subjugation that have sort of built up over time through the colonization process, and sort of gets rid of these sort of power dynamics and instead says, all are equal through me, and therefore all are in equal relationship with each other through me. Okay, so fundamentally, Paul sees Jesus's existence and meaning and purpose in this reconciliation process, bringing humans back together into relationship with each other, where they're wholly, completely, entirely themselves through relationship with Jesus. So this is a real or experienced reality. This is radical in that it's focused on social justice, focused on sort of undermining all these elements of injustice and power dynamics, so stripping those structures away and rebuilding society. It's revolutionary in that it is oriented towards complete change of structures. And the book kind of goes into a description of how this is in many ways the fundamental vision of first century Christian communities. They were striving to get rid of these power dynamics, rid of these oppressive dynamics of class and difference and otherness, to create these new, almost like these new worlds that were alternatives to the empire world. Now, Stevens presents a vision of reconciliation that's really heavily based on the place of reconciliation model. Now, I think that Stevens does a really good job in describing that, so I'm not going to really go into too much detail of it, but I want you to envision the sense of reconciliation being a concept, so similar to peace. Peace means one very specific thing to some people, it means many specific things to others, but as a general rule, peace is a conceptual landscape. You can imagine peace meaning a great many different things. Peace can play out through a multitude of different frameworks and processes. Peace is at some level both a practice that you sort of seek to derive a sense of inner peace possibly, and also peacemaking with others, but it is also an attitude. I am seeking to be in peace with others. It's a habit. You are going to habitually, continuously try to be in peace with those around you. Maybe you make choices that are focused on being in peace with others. It's something that's both at an individual level, but it's also the structural, societal, governmental level as well, where governments might have focuses, habits, practices that are geared towards peace and peacemaking, and those that are not, gearing towards war and war making. So, in that similar vein, reconciliation is itself a concept, and it is a concept which exists in sort of this harmonious place, which is not going to be the same for every situation, for every person, for every society, where it is that place where there's a harmony that exists between justice, peace, mercy, and truth, where you might need a little bit more of an emphasis on truth in one side for one circumstance for reconciliation to occur. You might need a little bit more mercy in another circumstance, truth, maybe a little more emphasis on peace, like actually stop fighting first, maybe, to achieve this place. But the place is itself this harmonious place where everyone is equally present and can equally bring the entirety of themselves to society, and they're equally cared for in society. So this idea of reconciliation being a place, a conceptual place, then maps itself onto it being actual places. So, for example, you can have certain buildings where people meet in order to be in some kind of relationship. Like, for example, it could be the United Nations is a building maybe which seeks to be peacemaking and seeks to build relationships of equality amongst all societies. So that could be an actual place of reconciliation. The human person can themselves be a place of reconciliation, in that, like other people that we may have encountered throughout time who are incredibly peaceful and just sort of radiate senses of peace and reconciliation with others, they themselves, through these practices and habits of being peaceful can radiate out this sort of emanations of reconciliation through how they act, through how they interact with others in the world. So reconciliation is a multitude of different things, and it plays on a multitude of different levels, as practice, process, attitude, habit, a political concept or process. We saw reconciliation being played out in South Africa, and in as the book starts to sort of talk about how it's going to play out in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we're going to talk about that in a few weeks. With Desmond Tutu, it actually has, inherent roots in placeness, but it also, reconciliation. For example, Stevens is coming from the Northern Irish context, where reconciliation is this political process, where you have these specific practices of political engagement that strive to create situations of reconciliation. And then Stevens also talks about it being a goal, a quest, even sort of thinking of it in this sense of it being an adventure, a path where you walk along it, but the path doesn't actually end, where reconciliation is never fully achieved, but it's something that one continuously grows into, and as a path may not ever truly end, you're just walking along the path. The journey is itself the reconciliation. But he also stresses this being a sacrifice, that also can lead towards feelings of healing, between peoples. So reconciliation is an incredibly complex term that is both comprised of multiple pretty simple to understand ideas of habit and process and specific processes, but also is this greater conceptual landscape of interactions and habits and attitudes, and an entire focuses of society where this also plays out on the cosmic level, where on the spiritual plane, you have reconciliation, you have a bringing back of relationship between the divine and the human, the atonement or at-one-ment, which is actually what it means. It is at-one-ment. It is bringing at one together, and then of course you have the through the divine, you have the relationships being reconciled between humans.